When you're putting in so much hard work at the gym, it's important that you're not wasting that time and that you're being as efficient as possible. In this video right here, I'm going to show you what actually creates an efficient lift, what actually is a really good exercise versus what's a bad exercise. Which one should you be doing? Which one should you probably not be doing, specifically for arm growth. So hi and welcome to this video. My name is Devin Ricker. I am a personal trainer. I have my master's in exercise physiology, if I can say it right. And in this video, that's what I'm going to show you. So let's just go ahead and jump in. So first off, let's talk about the factors that actually make a good exercise. The very first thing, this is going to sound just plain and simple. It's going to sound like duh, but you want to make sure you're choosing an exercise that actually targets the muscle. And not only does it target it, but the targeted muscle is the limiting factor. So for instance, if you're going to be doing something for your quads, you want to be doing something like a leg extension, something where it's actually working that muscle. But is it the limiting factor? I would argue that yes, the quads are the limiting factor. A good comparison would be like maybe squats. Maybe on squats, your quads aren't necessarily the limiting factor, but maybe your back or your glutes or something like that, or your core, so there's a lot of other muscles involved, not necessarily just your quads. So that's what we have to think of first, is we want to make sure we're targeting the muscle, and are those muscles that we're targeting necessarily the limiting factor. Now, this is mostly for hypertrophy training, like if you want to get bigger, you want to gain muscle. It's not necessarily for sport or strength. For instance, like in sport, like let's say you're playing football or something, squats would be way more valuable than most other exercises for the legs and for leg strength. But for something like hypertrophy, there might be better options like a leg press or a hack squat or something like that. So that's the first thing we need to think about. The second thing is does the exercise provide stability? For instance, going back to the leg muscle example, you don't want to do like a Bosu ball squat, right? You have very limited stability. And I know it's almost become a meme at this point, like in gym culture, where you see bad trainers having their clients on Bosu balls because it's harder to do. That's so incorrect for multiple reasons, but one of the big things is the more stable the exercise, the better it is for you, because you can produce more force, you can lift more weight, and it's just going to be more valuable to those muscles overall. So make sure whatever you're doing is stable. Another good example of that that's not so extreme is maybe if you're wanting to work your shoulders or your triceps or something like that, maybe a standing overhead press versus a seated overhead press. Where you're standing, you're working a lot of the core out. There's a lot more room for error. Whereas if you're seated, and especially if you're seated on a machine, it's on a set track. So there's almost no stability involved at all. So you can produce more force, and that might be more beneficial for hypertrophic gains. So that's another thing to think about. There's a lot of other ones, but another really big one is make sure that whatever you're working, whatever exercise you're choosing, you get a really good stretch in the muscle. And we'll talk about that more in our examples here in just a little bit, but think about going back to that quad example. One of the reasons why the leg extension may not be your best bet for growing your quads is because you're limited. Your legs are literally just bent like this and they extend up. But if you were able to bend them back behind you even more, like on a leg press or a sissy squat or something like that, you could actually get more of a stretch at both the knee and the hip joint. Whereas on the leg extension, most of the time you're sitting upright. So if you do a leg extension, I encourage you put the seat all the way back and then lean back into the seat. That way you have your hips are a little bit more open and you can work more of that. It's called the rectus femoris. Hit that more whenever you're doing a leg extension. So you want to make sure that you're stretching out the muscle that's being worked and you're actually working it in that stretched position. So those are some of the biggest factors. There's a couple of other ones, but we'll just stop right there for now. Those are some of the big ones that we're going to take into account. Now let's get on to why you're actually watching this video, which is don't do these exercises if you want to grow your muscles, especially your arm muscles. So of course, any exercise is better than no exercise. So these exercises that I'm about to talk about, you can do them, and yes, they will work, especially if you're newer to weightlifting and stuff, but they may not just give you the best bang for your buck. They may not, grow you to a certain degree, as much as some of these other ones that I'm going to list because of these principles that we've listed earlier. So let's talk about first the triceps. And I've mentioned this in another video before, but one of the worst exercises for triceps is actually the dumbbell kickback. Remember, that's the one where you're kind of maybe on a bench or leaning over and you have the dumbbell in your hand and you go like this, you kick it back. Why is that such a bad exercise? Because at the bottom of the lift right here, when your tricep is most stretched, you can just literally swing that dumbbell all day long, like right there. So there is no tension at the stretched position. There's really not tension until you get to about right here, which is the most contracted position. And we know from research that the more stretch that you get in the muscle and the more tension in the stretch, the better it is for gaining muscle, right? It's better for working that muscle. So instead of like a dumbbell kickback, think about doing something like a dumbbell overhead extension. So something like you have the dumbbell here, you could even do 2 hands at a time, but you're starting right here, so you're getting a really good stretch on that tricep, and you have a lot of good tension right there at the bottom of the exercise, and you're going up just like that, and you have really good tension throughout the lift, in the stretch, and the contracted position. So that's a really good alternative to the dumbbell kickback. There's a lot of other exercises that you could put in there, like maybe a dumbbell or even a cable overhead extension. Cables are some of the best exercises, in my opinion, for muscle growth, because you get a good constant tension. It's not really reliant so much on gravity, like in the downward force direction, like a dumbbell would be. So next up, that was the triceps. Next up would be the biceps. So this muscle right here, what can you do to really work on this? Most people are going to do something like a curl, like a dumbbell curl or a barbell curl standing in front of you. Again, not a bad option, but the thing with the curl is that it is most hard whenever the moment arm is the longest, right here. Like this would be the moment arm, which is, this is the axis, a little bit of physics involved, but the dumbbell is furthest away from the axis, right? That's when it's the hardest. It's not really hard at the stretched position of the muscle. So what exercise could we choose to make it really hard at the stretched position instead of already at the contracted position? That's what we're wanting to look for. And there's several different examples. One of my favorite though is if you do a lying or even an incline will get you closer dumbbell curl. So think about it. If you're laying down and your biceps are further behind you than like a standing curl, they're already going to be more stretched. And if you look at the angles, it's going to have you more tension at the bottom of the lift than up here towards more of the top of the lift. So that's a really good alternative. If you have cables, again, cables are some of my favorite exercises for muscle growth. You can actually set them up behind you and get a really big stretch right there, and then just curl them up like that. And that's going to be one of the best things you can do. And remember how we talked about stability earlier? A really good way to stabilize that exercise is to actually sit on a bench if you have one, have the cables behind you, and curl from there. That's one of the best bicep exercises in general. So give those a shot instead of just standing curls. Again, standing curls are okay. They will get you some gains for sure, but these are just, going to be a lot more efficient for you. And then finally, when we're talking about arm growth, we can't talk about arms without not just the biceps, not just the triceps, but the shoulders as well. Because when you look at the arm as a whole, the shoulders make up a really big chunk of it. So, and most people, honestly, when they're just looking at you, like outside of the gym, they're just like, whoa, look at they don't say necessarily, look at his shoulders. They say, like, look at his arms, but the shoulders really give you that width to your physique, and they really make your arms pop even more, especially if you have a good separation in the shoulders. So most people for these will do a standing dumbbell lateral raise, or whatever you want to call it, and they'll just come up to the side, and those work really well. But again, the force curve isn't advantageous to you as much as other exercises that I'll mention here in a second. For instance, the dumbbells get hardest at this position when the delt is most contracted, whereas at the bottom you could like just hold it there all day long until your grip gives out, but you're not really working the delts. So what exercises can we do to make it more efficient and to make it work the delt in this stretched position? Well, there's two that I have for you. The first is if you actually lean over, let's say we're working this arm, if you lean over this way so you can find a bench that's on an incline, lean over, have the arm stretched across your body, and then raise it up like that. That way, the force curve is a lot better for hypertrophic gains, and you're going to be working it mostly right around in this area, whereas if you're standing up, you're not working it at all in that area, right? And so that's more towards the stretch position. Another thing you can do is use the cables, and I personally, like if you've never tried this before, you have to try this exercise. It's my new favorite delt exercise. What I do is I set up the cables at about hip height or like wherever my arm is whenever I'm standing, and I use one at a time, and I have my arm behind my back. So the cable would be over here, I'm working this delt, arm behind the back, and I'm raising up just like that, and then I'm going down behind the back just like that. So try that out. and you can work on twisting your wrist in a little bit more. Sometimes people will say that will hit the lateral delt a little bit more, or you can open it up a little bit more to hit more of the front delt. Either way, you get a really, really good stretch. And because of the force curve, you're working it mostly in the position right here where it's at 90 degrees, and you're hitting it really good on that stretched position. So try those exercises instead of a standing dumbbell lateral raise. I hope you found that video helpful. And also, if you like this video, feel free to like and subscribe, and let me know what other questions you have in the comments down below, and I'll try to get to each one of them. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.